Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and a
Shalom.
happy Thanksgiving weekend. And Aliza and Dan and Elias, great to see you. Michelle will be here shortly. And great to be learning with you on this Shabbat morning of Thanksgiving weekend. Before he died earlier this month, Jonathan Sacks, he published not one but two books, an extraordinary profusion of creativity and insight. One book is Morality that we've been studying in our shul, T.E. Reads. We're reading it 3 chapters at a time, meeting every few weeks on it. But the other book that he published before he died, this came out in September and he died in November, is called Judaism's Life-Changing Ideas. And what he does in Judaism's Life-Changing Ideas is for every Torah portion, he sees something that nobody else really sees, but it's there once he points it out. I'll show you an example today. And then he derives from that a life-changing lesson. And you'll see each life-changing lesson is very crisply articulated, and it just gives you a lot to think about. So without further ado, let's take a look at Vayetze, which is our reading. We got to thank God for the gift of learning Torah together, and then we'll take a look at his treatment of Vayetze. We'll look at the portions of Vayetze that he relies on, and also a little bit next week, Vayishlach. And then we'll draw out what does it mean for us this Thanksgiving of 2020, this Thanksgiving of the pandemic. Let's thank God together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. V'ha'arev na Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu u'b'fi amcha be'Yisrael. V'nigya anachnu v'tzatza'enu v'tzatza'ei amcha be'Yisrael. Kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha l'shma. Baruch atah Adonai ha'melamed Torah li'amo Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natam lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So what we're going to do is just read an excerpt from his chapter on this week's portion. It's on page 1 of the handout, Vayetze, Out of the Depths. And Eliza, will you just read the first 2 paragraphs and then the first sentence of the 3rd paragraph, and that'll get us started.
What did Jacob add to the Jewish experience? What is it that we find in him that we do not find the same measure in Abraham and Isaac? Why is it his name, Jacob Israel, that we carry in our identity? How was it that all his children stayed within the faith? Is there something of him in our spiritual DNA? There are many answers. I explore one here and another in the next parsha, Vayishlach. Jacob was the man whose deepest spiritual encounters happened when he was on a journey, alone and afraid at the dead of night, fleeing from one danger to another. In this parsha, we see him fleeing from Esau and about to meet Laban, a man who would cause him great grief. In the following parsha, we see him fleeing in the opposite direction, from Laban to Esau, a meeting that filled him with dread. He was very afraid and distressed. Jacob was supremely the lonely man of faith. Yet it is precisely at these moments of maximal fear that he had spiritual experiences that have no parallel in the lives of either Abraham or Isaac, nor even Moses.
So first, just note how deep this question is. You know, it's famously stated, and we all know this from the Amidah, when we do the paragraph about Avot, we say Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And the famous question is, why doesn't it just say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? And the equally famous answer is that each of these patriarchs had a different relationship with God. They each embody a different spiritual move. Abraham's relationship is different from Isaac's, different from Jacob's. So his question really is, what is it about Jacob that is unique and different? What is his move, and to what extent does that speak to us? And he points out that Jacob is a person who is very vulnerable and very alone and very exposed and very terrified and at night. And I just want to take a look at the portion to show you that, because there's 2 vignettes of younger Jacob and older Jacob. Elias, if you'll just read, this is from this morning's portion, Rabbi Sachs points out that he is alone at night, alone at night, alone at night. And all of us know what it's like at 3 in the morning. When you get up in the middle of the night at 3 in the morning and you can't sleep, that's just a level of anxiety and edge and alarm that many of us know. And this is Jacob, 3 in the morning. If you'll pick up on page 4 of the handout. Jacob left Beersheba.
All right. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. He came upon a certain place and stopped there for the night, for the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of that place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place.
So just pause here. Jacob has never really been out. He's Yoshev Ohalim. He likes home. He's a homebody. And he's running for his life. His brother Esau wants to kill him. He's a young man who's a fugitive from his own brother. He also must have all this guilt about what he did. He lied to his blind father, etc. He stole from his brother, etc. And now his life is a hot mess. And he's running for his life. And he's not at a nice hotel or even a youth hostel. He's literally sleeping with a pillow is his rock. A rock is his pillow. And then, of course, he has the dream of God, a stairway that was set up to heaven, which we know about. And I just want to take you to that to get to Rabbi Sachs's point for a second. So he's vulnerable, he's alone, he's terrified. He has an encounter of God. By the way, the rabbis take this as his davening Mariv, that somehow he has an encounter with God. But just at the end of the story, because it doesn't end with him feeling great, it ends with him feeling nervous. Michelle, will you just pick up on page 6, the vow, after he has the dream, and after God says, I'm going to be with you, if you'll just pick up with verse 20, Jacob then made a vow saying.
Yes, just give me one moment. Jacob then made a vow saying, if God remains with me, and God protects me on this journey that I am making, and gives me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and if I return safe to my father's house, the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I have set up as a pillar shall be God's abode, and of all that you give me, I will set aside a tithe for you.
So, question, if God has just said, I'm going to be with you, and he has this dream, the famous dream with the ladder, and literally on the previous page, verse 15, God says, remember, I am with you. This is God speaking. I, God, am with you. I will protect you wherever you go. Will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised. And Jacob gets that surely God is in this place and I didn't know it. Yet, not a minute later, he feels uncertain again. So what does this say about Jacob, and how does this fit into Rabbi Sachs's interpretation? And can you relate to this kind of edge?
I can relate. Okay. Can I bring some funny vignette here?
By all means.
All right. So, this idea of asking God for something in retribution, like if you do something for me, I will do. So this reminds myself, when I was in high school, I have to admit I was kind of a rascal, and I like sports and music, and that's it. So many times I would go to exams, and I wasn't really prepared. And I had dialogues with God, in those days, saying, God, please, if you help me getting through this exam today, I will help my parents, I will do the dishes, I will do the grocery, I will do everything. And that was constantly my dialogue. Sometimes he helped me, sometimes or she or it, and sometimes he didn't. But it's, leaving that aside, this is a whole another topic of what do we only find God in moments of trouble, and we ask that God, in whatever form it is, for retribution, to come and save us to a certain point.
Right, and that's his point, that Jacob's, his orienting question is, what's different about Jacob? What does he add to our spiritual conversation? Answer, it's in trouble. It's in deep distress, where he's really alone and on the run, where he finds God. Dan.
See, I kind of found I took a little tiny bit of issue with that, because he mentioned that that Moshe doesn't have this, Abraham doesn't have this, but in my perspective, they both do, in the sense that Abraham is tested 10 times. Take your son, sacrifice him, right? So I mean, even though Abraham was walking with Yitzchak, to the place of sacrifice, he's alone. He's really alone at that moment. He's alone and in trouble. How many times was Moshe alone and in trouble, even though there's like 600,000 people with him? He's spiritually alone and in trouble. So I don't think that. So my feeling is that Yaakov was not the only one that brought this perspective. And
it's within the name. It's within the name Israel.
Right. I
the
get
one who
that.
wrestles with God. I feel like you guys can talk, but I feel Abraham was much more faithful and much more. We talked about the Akedah last week.
But also, Dan, just one thing, and then Michelle and Elisa, just on your comment, one distinguishing characteristic of Jacob as opposed to Abraham and Moses, correct me if I'm wrong, but both here and next week, Jacob's angst is located at night, in the middle of the night. He lays his head on a rock, and I guess next week as well, it's at night when he wrestles with the angel, and not the case with Abraham and Moses. So how do you see this issue? We all have worries during the day, but then we also have those same worries at night, where the demons are even more florid at night. How does that factor into your analysis? The fact that he's pegged to nighttime worry. He's pegged to darkness. Also at night, you're alone. I mean, even if you're with your partner, you're alone in the middle of the night. You're alone. Does that factor in for you?
Well, yeah. Given that analysis, I would say yes. That makes Yaakov different. I'm not sure. I have to flesh it a little bit more.
Elisa.
So he's just the response to God. God's like, I'm here with you. I'm promising all these things, and he's like, I still don't fully buy that. On the condition that XYZ, then I'll be in relationship with you. That feels like a very interesting place. Like he has this incredible, unique experience of God, and he's still not moved. And I think that's something that is true for many of us. And in the moments where we're most scared, no amount of proof really helps. Like no amount of logic really helps in those nighttime moments.
God is here, and I didn't know. It's what we are going to read further.
Elisa, can you relate to Jacob's the combination of presence of God? He did just have the dream, and God is here, and I didn't know it, and also the doubt or the edge, or if you will be with me and give me food and clothing and safety, I'll be with you. Can you relate to that move of God is here, and by the way, God, if you are here?
5,000%. I mean, I'll join you in the sort of funny anecdotes. When I met Solomon, I knew we were deeply in love, and I knew that he was in love with me, and like we were gonna get married. And yet, the months before he proposed were so anxiety filled with me, and there was no data that could generate that kind of anxiety, and no data that could make me propose to him on a loop, a record, like broken record of just please marry me, please, are we going to get married? There was no there, but I was super anxious about it. So and again, all the data was pointing towards like, you're fine, this is a normal relationship progression, it's reasonable to wait, but I was in a space of real anxiety about it.
Right. What about you, Wes?
What about me? Definitely. I mean, and I feel like that's me and us, all of us now, which is, 260,000 Americans dead later. I always worry and wonder and question, what is the efficacy, what's the impact, what's the use? Every night, literally, every night for 9 months, we keep praying Mishaberachs, and people keep dying. And so I hold both of those, and when I say those prayers for Mishaberach, I mean them with full-on intensity, and then the numbers just keep growing to 260,000. So I feel very much in this same Jacob space of presence and question at the same time. And also it's worse at night. Michelle?
I think much is made of this if. And if you dig down into the Hebrew and you see im, right, the word we translate in modern Hebrew as if, but the rest of the verse, there are a lot of ifs as we translate it into English that are not there in the Hebrew. And I wonder if there is a sense that his anxiety and his fear, which continue on, really have to do not so much with God and bargaining with God as the classic rabbinic commentary makes him out to be. You know, he's always the one who's in it for the better deal. But I see here today, in the middle of a pandemic, a sense of like, can this happen? Could it possibly be that God could be with me? And how might I perceive myself in a different way? How might I act in a different way? You know, setting up this stone and giving a tithe, if I could really feel like I was walking with God. And in a sense, it's a process that Jacob is undergoing in his own heart to try to grapple with what this new role where he's encountering God means for him and the path that he's about to set off on.
If I understand you, Michelle, you're saying, well, one way to read it, the way that we often read it, usually read it, have read it this morning, is he's bargaining with God.
Yeah.
If you give me X, Y, and Z, food, clothing, safety, then I'll be your faithful devotee and you'll be my God.
Yeah.
But you're offering a different read, which is, it's a complicated and ambivalent relationship, regardless of the food and the clothing, that no matter what, the whole spiritual quest is inherently complicated and layered.
And it's fraught in the sense of like the bread to eat and the clothing to wear. Like, I'm articulating, these are my basic needs. And could it really happen that God would walk through this world? My prayers have been unanswered for so long. I'm here in a moment where I've been at night, I've been alone. Although this is the first time we see him in this moment of crisis, he had a long relationship with his brother that was troubled.
So he also has a long relationship with God. I want to talk about next week's reading for just a second, because this feels to me like one of the scariest moments of the Torah, which is, so he goes to Lavan, he goes to Mesopotamia, he marries actually 4 women, Rachel and Leah and Bilhah and Zilpah. He now has, 12 or 10, 12, 13 kids, whatever it is. He's got all these kids. He's got his 4 wives. And he comes back 20 years later, and he sends messengers who tell him that, oh, your brother, who last vowed to kill you, is here with 400 men. 400 men is an army, okay? And then take a look on page 8. And this is a Sophie's Choice moment, the Holocaust film with Meryl Streep, where you're going to, you have to pick one child. So verse 8, Jacob was greatly frightened. In his anxiety, he divided the people with him and the flocks and herds and camels into 2 camps, thinking if Esau comes to the one camp and attacks it, the other camp may yet escape. Can you even begin to imagine how damaging that is psychologically? That you're in a moment of mortal peril. So now, this is much worse than 20 years earlier. I mean, in today's reading, he's anxious, he's not alone, he's on his run, what will be? Now he's got family, he's got children, he's got wives, and now he has to do this Sophie's Choice. An army with 400 people is going to attack. Which of my wives do I love more? Which of my wives do I love less? Which of my children do I love more? Which of my children do I love less? If Esau's going to kill some of my wives, and if Esau's going to kill some of my children, which ones will I offer up, and which ones will I try to protect? Can you imagine how damaging that Sophie's Choice is? And again, at night, he offers this prayer, deliver me, I pray, from the hands of my brother, from the hand of Esau, else I fear he may come and strike me down, mothers and children alike. Yet you have said, I will deal bountifully with you and make your offspring as the sands of the sea, which are too numerous to count. So Jacob is still praying in a place of deep fear. How does this encounter 20 years later affect the basic analysis about Jacob as the lonely man of faith in the middle of the night? Dan?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, we talk about this a lot of times. So our relationship with God and our relationship is our spirituality transactional, which Jacob seems to be transactional. If God will do this, then I'll do that. So it seems to me that there's some moments that it's lack of faith, that it's really lack of faith, because if God doesn't do these things, then God won't be God for Jacob, right? So that's one thing. And this Sophie's Choice moment, I personally find this 100% reprehensible. Protect everybody or not, but don't do that division thing. That's just like totally reprehensible to me. It's like I can't imagine that anyone would think in those terms.
Right.
That's just like, to me.
But can I just point out that he doesn't actually make a choice of which kids he's going to put here and which kids. He divides his camp. Yes, true, but there's no sense of like, and I put Bill has kids.
There is
forward,
totally. If you read the rest of it, he totally does that. He totally does that. He totally does that. Yes, that's true.
Rachel's on the other side.
He totally
of course,
does it,
but you don't have the sense that like this is a bargaining moment here. It's not. I actually would say that from the text itself, if you look from verse 10, if you go back, "O God of my father," right? He's pleading to Abraham's God here and Isaac's God, like, "I am unworthy of all the kindness that you've shown me. Now deliver me." It's actually much more of a classic prayer than the first one when he laid down his head on a rock. It actually speaks to Rabbi Sachs's point that in the darkness, he's discovering for himself a relationship with a God who actually can walk with him and can redeem him and can support him in a way that perhaps early on he wasn't sure. He had that anxiety, but now he's he's in the wedding. He's not in the engagement. He's in the career. He's not in the, I'm still taking tests and worrying about music and soccer. He now actually has, it feels to me, a mature relationship. He said, actually, you did this. You said this, and I'm expecting that you're going to do this.
Right.
I think he's full of fear, but fear of not his brother, but his own actions.
For sure.
Yeah. So here he is. He's deeply alone and deeply fearful, but he's present with God in the sense of he has a connection to God. Save me, Hatzileni na miyadachi miyad Esav. He feels a connection to God. So here's the pivot to Rabbi Sachs, and then I want to ask all of us to think about how this point lands in our own lives or in our own thinking. Take a look back on page 3, and this is just so cool. It's one of the crisp aspects of Rabbi Sachs's book. He literally numbers and enumerates his life-changing ideas. That's the gift of Jacob, and this is his life-changing idea, that out of the depths, we can reach the heights. The deepest crises of our lives can turn out to be the moments when we encounter the deepest truths and acquire our greatest strengths. And then life-changing idea number 7, just so cool. The deepest crises of your life can turn out to be the moments when you encounter the deepest truths and acquire your greatest strengths. And all I want to say is what's just implicit and unstated but should be stated is the person who's exhibit A to this is Rabbi Sachs himself, because he writes this book and publishes this book and morality while he's got pancreatic cancer. And he publishes this in September, and he retires from public life in October, and he dies in November. So while he is dying, he is just one profusion, like a supernova of Torah. And this idea of from crisis, deep connectivity, deep emotionality, deep spirituality, deep relationship with God comes from those moments of the deepest crises. He actually embodies it without ever saying it, but he just gives us this supernova, these 2 books at the end. So,
and by the way, interview after interview after interview, trying to help guide people through the pandemic.
Right.
In the early pieces of the pandemic, which is just amazingly precious Torah.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, and Elias, I'll start with you. I mean, you started singing, even though I know we're not supposed to sing, but Min HaMeitzar Karati from the depths. From the depths, I called out to you. Could you talk about how this idea, because there's a lot of from the depths, I call out to you. How does it inform your davening and your own relationship with God as a person and as a shliach tzibur?
So I want to bring an episode that happened to me when I was a kid that I usually don't talk much about it. So I went to Jewish day school, and I remember vividly I was 9 years old. My brother was 11. And normally my dad would drive us to school and pick us up. So one day when I was in 4th grade, I was 9 at the end of the Jewish day school, my next door neighbor comes and he says, guys, I'm going to pick you up today and you guys are going to stay with us for the rest of the afternoon until your parents have some issue to resolve. That was very strange to me. So I went with them and I had a good time. And what was even stranger was that my dad owned a furniture store, and it was, in a busy street, and we used to live on the 2nd and 3rd floor of that furniture store. And the store was closed. And I said, I don't remember what happened. I don't understand what happened. And then a couple of hours later, my mom comes to pick us up and to tell us that my dad had a heart attack. And he was in the hospital. He almost died. But they didn't want to upset us, and so that's the reason the neighbor didn't tell us anything. And then my dad was in the hospital for 2 months. He had a very serious condition. The end of the story is that he got to live 30 more years, so he was fine. But I remember that period as the scariest period of my life, especially at night. The first thing that I thought about when I read about Jacob at night was that episode in my life. And I remember that my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and the only provider in the family was my dad. And I was 9 years old, fearing about what will be of us, fearing what will be our future, how we are going to pay for the Jewish day school if my dad dies, And I remember that with my brother, sometimes you have to be the parents of your parents. With my brother, 9 and 11 years old, we decided that each night we were going to take turns to sleep with my mom, to make her company. And I remember, I still have it in my head, my brother sleeping with my mom, and I will be in the next room, so scared. And it was so dark, so scared. And, that was such an impact in my life. And again, it's a happy ending story because after a couple of months, my dad was able to come back, and then he was able to reestablish his life and get back to the business. But that was the scariest moment of my life.
Elias, thank you so much for sharing that. I have some questions.
Yes.
That intensity, being a child and your father's hearing about heart attack and your dad's in the hospital and all that, it's so tenuous and fragile. And obviously it has such an emotional connection and hold. How does that vulnerability and that experience affect your prayer life as a person and as a prayer leader?
Well, in a way, the outcome, it's actually, the outcome was good in that in a way helps. Because I got to live so many decades after with my dad. He was able to, as you know, he was able to see me singing in synagogue so many times and leading in prayer, and he had wonderful joy about. But I'm not so sure. So then I became a man of faith. But I don't know what would have happened if my dad would have died.
Did that experience of your dad's heart attack and you and your brother supporting your mother, that very intense childhood experience, did that contribute to your wanting to become a chazan?
Well, I don't think so. I don't think so because I always loved to sing, and it was like a year and a half later that I started to sing actively at the temple, sort of like Shabbat Alive. They will give me opportunities to lead a few songs on Friday night, and but later on, thinking about, perhaps yes, perhaps wow. it shaped me.
One other question, Elias, not to put you on the hot spot, but throughout our months of learning together, you have brought up the unique and distinctive horrible pain that happened to Argentinian Jewry, with the bombing of the JCC, et cetera. which is just unimaginable. What was that's also a dark night of anguish. What was the impact of that dark night of anguish on your faith?
Specifically those episodes in
Yes.
Argentina, no, I actually felt way more connected and way more, with conviction that that was the path, that was the way of going. It didn't create any doubts about my faith. It actually created the opposite.
Connectivity, deeper connectivity.
Connectivity, I have to be here, I have to be strong, and we have to be here for one another.
Thank you, Elias. Dan, you're a man of faith. I mean, you actually live here. You sleep
Lord
here
Nelson.
in the Gann Chapel. How does this depiction of Jacob, 20 years earlier, 20 years later, at night, with deepest fears, and also somehow that connects into the presence of God, how does that whole concept intersect with your life?
Right, so there are two things I was thinking of. One is the Rabbi Sachs's statement that these moments of darkness and crisis can bring us to a closer relationship. But that's not true for everyone. There are people that can't get through it. And I'm very sad for that. As a general, you look at the suicide rate right now, people that the loneliness, it's just so difficult for so many people. So that's just sort of on a broader level. For myself on a personal level, I do have a lot of dark nights. I worry about, especially since Sue passed away, I worry constantly about Emma and making sure that she's going to be supported in every possible way. So there are many nights that I'm up, and just sometimes you'll see that I'm quite tired because I'm actually sleeping for maybe 2 hours a night, just because there are things that worry me about making sure that I can be the best that I can be, and I know that there are countless moments that I fail. And I worry about those moments of failure and how that's going to be impactful, for moving forward. So to me, I guess it's like Yaakov. It's just that there are I don't feel settled. That sometimes I feel very faithful. Have a lot of great faith in God, and sometimes I just don't.
And Dan, well, first of all, thank you, and just want to receive your honest words. And also acknowledge that you're raising Emma as a single parent, because Sue passed away. And that just feels so daunting. How do those worries that you have in the middle of the night, the sleepless night, you sleep 2 hours a night, then at 7 a.m. and here you are, please rise for Birchat HaShachar on page 6.
You actually say that, he doesn't.
How do those two moments encounter each other? That is, the sleepless night, the worry, in your house 50 feet from here, and then at 7 o'clock, Birchat HaShachar. How do those two moments intersect for you?
That's a hard question to answer. There's a point where it just says, I just have to be there, and have to be there for the kahal, and so therefore, it doesn't really matter what's going on with me. What matters is that what we're doing here, as a team, is helping others to connect and get through the complex time. So sometimes a lot of times, and I find this all the time, especially like Elias, we've talked about this before in the high holidays, and Elisa also, that we have our moments where we can actually pray as deeply as possible when we're more thinking about what we need to, about the logistics, the kahal, those kind of things, that we have to sublimate our our personal moments for a different a sense of connection.
Okay, just before I leave you, Dan, I hear that, that's kind of like when Nadav and Avihu die, and Moses tells Aaron, "Hey, buck up. You got a service to run.
Yeah.
And we'll mourn for your dead sons. You got to get to work, right?" So I hear that aspect, that we're professionals and we have a congregation responsibility, and therefore, we just need to be able to make sure, please rise, please be seated, and get a smooth service going. I get that, but I'm asking you a different question, which is, does that smooth service or the prayerful moments that take place in that smooth service, does that actually help your soul?
I need to come back to that.
Okay.
I want to say yes off the bat, but I think it's nuanced.
I think
It's
if I may, I remember vividly you used to teach the kids when we had like the 5th grade service with the Siddur and stuff about the feeling. And you used to say, do the thing, do the mitzvah, put it on, and then it will grow in you. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
So you would say, like, sometimes, we do this because it's our job, and I believe it's my case. I don't know, I speak for myself here. Sometimes the words don't mean anything to us. We are in a certain place at our lives that no matter what, it's your disbelief that he was going to propose. No matter how rational or spiritual you try to be, not like Asi Schwartz, but how spiritual you want to be, he doesn't do it for you. He doesn't do it. And sometimes we are there. So it's not like it's an easy path and we are always connected and it grows. It grows, right. It goes back, it grows, it goes back.
Yes, kind of like Jacob, yeah. Michelle or Elisa, did either of you wish to add your voices here?
It doesn't feel like a text moment.
I think that for me, I'm cautious about this theology, and it feels really important to note that this is a really good theology and a good teaching when you're looking back on pain and trauma, and not a really good teaching when you're in it always.
Say more.
Well, I think that it's really important to experience the brokenness when you're in it without, like, trying to take out what's going to be your teaching and what's going to be your lesson and what's going to be your thing moving forward. That sometimes you just have to go through what you're going through. And I don't see him having radical awakenings or growing amazing in powerful ways as a human in those broken moments we talked about at the beginning. He experiences God and he goes right back into his doubt. Like, he's afraid for his brother and he's praying, but it's actually later on in his life that he's able to access those blessings. And I think that's just an important acknowledgement for all of us when we're going through challenging times. And I think it's not always a direct relationship, right? It's not always my difficult moments that are going to seed my greatest prayers, but it's often lessons of my people or lessons of people that I know that are helpful. So we were talking about this early in the week, and I was thinking about, I had a Hebrew school teacher when I was just before my bat mitzvah. She was also a drummer, and I remember she taught us, all sorts of fun activities and teachings, but one of the things she taught us is she used to, when she went to get her scans, which are in like these loud machines that were banging all around her, and she found it very frightening, she used to sing Ma Gadlu Ma'asecha Adonai, which is from the psalm we sing for Shabbat, which is, wow, God, your thought processes are so deep we can't even grasp it, but you are great, and we want to say to that, hallelujah. Like, I don't understand what's happening to me, but I want to say to that, hallelujah. And I always think about her with that prayer, and it wasn't my moment of darkness that seeds the greatest teaching, but whenever I'm in a hard moment, I think about her hard moment and her wisdom that she got out of that, and that seeds mine. Mm. And it's sort of an after the fact reality.
Mm. Thank you. Michelle?
So I've been taking in, thank you, colleagues, for sharing really such beautiful truth. I really, it hits my heart very deeply. I've been thinking a lot about, in some ways, the book says Judaism's life-changing ideas, but in some ways I almost feel like the baseline is accessing God when we're at times of trouble and sorrow and struggle. Those times when you're alone in the middle of the night. Rabbi Nachman taught the Tikkun Chatzot, this moment when you're alone is a moment that sort of the veil and all of your defenses kind of lower, and you're able to be more vulnerable with God, and in a sense, maybe sometimes even a little easier. It's much harder to access and appreciate God actually when we're out of the depths, right? When things are going just well and okay. I mean, part of the wisdom of the Birkat Hamazon is you actually have to train yourself to thank God when things are going okay, because there's not this natural instinct that Jacob has here of like, help me, save me, do something. I don't have any more tools in my tool chest. And I wonder if this finding God at night piece is so particularly precious to us, not because it's so unusual, but because actually it is so palpable to each of us on a level that's beyond words. You don't have to come in for Shachris Mincha Mariv to find that God. You just have to be in enough crisis and enough vulnerability to see it.
Yeah, and just to build back on Dan's comment on Rabbi Sachs, he says Jacob is unique, and Dan says, what about Abraham? What about Moses? And in a way, what I hear you saying, Michelle, is Jacob's struggle is so universal and accessible and relatable. Yeah. I mean, exactly zero of us has ever been tempted to chop off the head of our firstborn and burn him up on an sacrifice. I mean, that's Abraham's deal. We read about it, we're appalled by it, we would never be tempted by it. Exactly zero of us have Moses' experience of confronting the Pharaoh and trying to lead a people through wilderness for 40 years, right? So they have their trials of faith, but they're not our trials of faith. Akedat Yitzchak is not our trial of faith, and Yetziat Mitzrayim is not our trial of faith. But Jacob's trial of faith, like I'm scared, I'm alone, I'm vulnerable, that's 100% of us. Yeah. I just want to end by sharing a story that I remember. That Pirkei Avot talks about Sa'ar Gidul Banim, the kishka, the pain of raising kids. And of course, if you're a parent, 100% of parents have Sa'ar Gidul Banim. That's why it's in Pirkei Avot. You can't raise kids without Sa'ar Gidul Banim because, of course, you care so much and you actually control nothing, right? You care so much, you care with infinity, and you can control so little to nothing, especially as they grow older. Anyway, one particular year, right before Rosh Hashanah, I was encountering some issues with our kids that were very Sa'ar Gidul Banim, that just caused me a lot of Jacob-like anxiety. And it was supposed to be Rosh Hashanah that night. In fact, it was going to be Rosh Hashanah that night. And this was pre-pandemic, when there were actually people in the Rabbi Chill Sanctuary. And I had to give a sermon and lead a high holiday service. And my heart was in just such a broken place. And like Rosh Hashanah was coming just like in a minute. So I remember talking to Michelle. And I shared with Michelle some of the challenges that Shira and I were facing with our kids. And Rosh Hashanah is coming. And I said, now, how do I get through Rosh Hashanah services? And, Michelle is just like the best rabbi in the world. And she was the best rabbi to me. And she said to me, you kind of have two choices. You could compartmentalize and just put these issues you have with your kids to the side and just get through, they'll still be here when Rosh Hashanah is over. So just be a disciplined professional. You love discipline. You love Shachris Mincha Mariv. put the kids to the side and announce, please rise and please be seated, give your sermon, do your thing, be a professional, be disciplined. That's one move, the compartmentalization move. Or she said you could actually channel the pain and pathos of what you're going through in your prayers. You could actually take, instead of putting it to the side, you can put it in your heart, and maybe the connectivity will be even deeper. So I think that is the challenge of being a descendant of Jacob, to take the pain and the pathos of life, which 100% of us have in different ways, different times, and how do we take that pain and pathos and have it deepen our connectivity to God, and that connectivity to God can help us get through it. Shabbat Shalom, Happy
Shabbat Shalom.
Thanksgiving. We'll see you at
Shabbat Shalom.
9:30.
Sure.